welcome to Power Play on this Thursday. I'm Vashi Capellos in Ottawa. Tonight, negotiating with Donald Trump.
Everybody wants to come and make a deal, and we're working with a lot of different countries.
A day into pausing most of his global trade war, Donald Trump claims he's ready to negotiate. What's this country's plan? We're on the campaign trail to find out. Then, to poll or not to poll?
The only poll that matters is the poll that happens on Election Day.
What you need is a new government, a conservative government.
Obviously, we would accept the results of the election.
Some conservative supporters aren't buying public opinion polls that show their party trailing the Liberals when their rally crowds are so big. We're going to talk about that with our special campaign front bench tonight. Monty Solberg, Christy Clark, and Nathan Cullen are all coming up. Plus, an accusation of campaign malpractice.
Blowing a 25-point lead and being like 10 points down is campaign malpractice at the highest level. And I'm sorry to have to point that out.
Doug Ford's campaign manager takes aim at Pierre Poilievre and his team, accusing them of squandering a big lead. Corey tonight will join us live to tell us why in moments. First, though.
We're trying to get the world to treat us fairly. This is something that should have been done 25 years ago, and it wasn't. Should have been done 40 years ago, and it wasn't. But no president was willing to take it on, but you had to. It's not sustainable. We have Scott here and Howard and some of the people that are working on deals, and the biggest problem they have is they don't have enough time in the day. Everybody wants to come and make a deal, and we're working with a lot of different countries, and it's all going to work out very well. I think it's going to work out really very well, but we're in good shape.
Donald Trump claims he's ready to negotiate the end of global tariffs, and there are reports this evening that Peter Navarro, one of the strongest proponents of those tariffs in the Trump orbit, has been sidelined. Trump has been clear that he wants to reward countries who aren't using counter tariffs, suspending almost all of his so-called reciprocal tariffs yesterday. But for Canada, it's status quo, prompting reporters to ask Liberal leader Mark Carney if he'd consider halting Canada's counter tariffs in his capacity as Prime Minister.
We've had very direct and frequent conversations with the United States officials, myself with the President, Minister LeBlanc with his counterpart, Secretary Lutnick. I think they understand our position. We have been subject to a series of direct tariffs that are still in place with respect to steel and aluminum, with automobiles, and of course I will call them the fentanyl tariffs that are in place. Key point is that we have agreed to begin negotiations between the Prime Minister and the President immediately following the election.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford was also on the receiving end of that question this morning during an interview on CNN. Take a listen.
Could you see Canada, Premier, actually rolling back those tariffs on the U.S. as an olive branch to the Trump administration?
Well, as long as we know the tariffs are going to be dropped against Canada as well. If we have a mutual understanding, if they feel comfortable with us going first, by all means. But we need insurance that President Trump's going to drop those tariffs shortly after we do.
Our Abigail Beeman is on the campaign trail with more details on the Liberals'
Mark
tariff
Carney
strategy.
says he spoke with the president of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, today. The EU, of course, pausing their retaliatory tariffs. Carney was asked what he needs to see to do the same. He didn't directly answer, but referenced the tariffs that are still in place for Canada. Carney said what's key is there is an agreement to begin negotiations between the U.S. president and whoever is elected prime minister immediately following the election. And he called it a comprehensive economic and security negotiation. Carney says if he's the one to do it, if he's elected, he will make sure he stands firm, as he puts it, for workers in any negotiation. I asked Carney about Canada's options here. He said previously there's a limit to what we can impose, keeping in mind how much bigger the United States economy is. I asked him how far are we from that limit. He didn't exactly answer that either, saying it's all part of those bigger negotiations, and again repeating what he wants to be a central ballot question: who do Canadians want representing them at that negotiation table? Carney is stepping off the campaign trail once again, holding a meeting as Prime Minister with the U.S.-Canada Cabinet Committee tomorrow morning. He heads back to Ottawa tonight. Vashi?
All right, thanks so much, Abigail. That's Abigail Beeman traveling with the Liberals covering their campaign. As for the campaign and what they announced, the Liberals laid out a laundry list today of public safety promises, including a pledge to continue the gun buyback program originally promised by Justin Trudeau, revoke gun licenses for individuals convicted of violent crimes, and recruit or train 1,000 RCMP and CBSA officers. Over to the Conservatives now. Pierre Poilievre announced today that a Tory government would save homebuyers an average of $100,000 on the purchase of new homes, hitting that $100,000 mark by stacking a promise to incentivize municipalities to cut building taxes on top of his previous promise to eliminate the sales tax on new homes under $1.3 million. And I believe it's Rachel Aiello who is following that campaign today. She is with us live right now. Hey, Rachel, good to have you here. You asked the question today based on the supporters that showed up at the rally last night who were questioning the validity through their, a moniker on their shirt of the polls. Tell us a bit about what you asked Poilievre and his response.
Yeah, so today I asked Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre kind of a two-part question. One, does he believe the polls, and would he confirm that he would respect the results of the election no matter the outcome? And as you noted too, this was kind of sparked by something we watched unfold at the Brampton rally last night. There was a small group of people at the event wearing these sweaters and holding signs questioning, do you trust the polls? And this is questioning the current polls that are showing the Conservatives behind the Liberals after Poilievre once had what was around a 20-point lead. So that was the question that we put to Poilievre today, and his answer, pretty short in all, just said yes, and then went on to say that Canadians will decide in this election if you want another 4 years of Liberals or if you want Conservative change. And in that short kind of yes, Vashi, there were some questions of was he saying, yes, he believes the polls, and yes, he will respect the outcome of the election. So I spoke with one of the campaign staffers on the ground afterwards, and they said that yes was about upholding the election results. And then, as you probably heard, as the announcement kind of finished, there were reporters questioning Poilievre again, trying to get him on record to clarify, do you trust the polls? Do you trust the polls? And he walked away and didn't answer that.
Okay, Rachel, thanks for your reporting. Appreciate it. Rachel Aiello following the Conservative campaign. Over finally to the NDP. Leader Jagmeet Singh didn't have any announcements today of his own new policy. Instead, used the day to take aim at the Liberals, arguing a Mark Carney government would cut services from Canadians. Is it all part of a broader campaign pivot as NDP public opinion polling support erodes? Our Mike Locouture is following Jagmeet Singh's campaign and has this report for us.
Well, Vashi, the campaign is trying to remain upbeat as it sees polling numbers keeping the NDP in a distant third place. Now, yesterday, they held a rally in Saskatoon, attended by some 300 people. Earlier in the day, Jagmeet Singh said whatever the result of the election, he's hoping it'll be a minority parliament. Several times, he explained to reporters how voters are telling him that they believe Ottawa works best when one party doesn't have all the power. Now, today, he took aim at Mark Carney, claiming a Liberal government under him would make cuts in order to rein in spending. Now, Carney has said that he wanted to balance the operational spending over the next 3 years. The NDP believes that will mean cuts to health care. Carney pushed back on that today, saying there will be no cuts to health care. On Carney's website, it does say that transfers to provinces, including the Canada Health Transfer, will be maintained, but Singh seized on that language.
Bankers speak for maintaining spending is freezing. Freezing is a cut if you talk about healthcare. If you freeze investments in healthcare with an aging population, with a growing population, with increased needs, and with inflation, if you freeze, that is a cut. Freezing healthcare spending, maintaining healthcare spending is a cut.
Now, Singh and Carney both made stops in Saskatchewan, believing they have a shot at taking some seats in this province. The provincial NDP nearly doubled its seat total in last fall's election, and Singh's team is hoping for a breakthrough here. Vashi?
All right, thanks, Mike. That's CTV's Mike LeCouture on the campaign trail with the NDP in Saskatoon. Something else making waves on the campaign trail tonight, a leading Conservative strategist taking aim at his own party. Corey tonight was Stephen Harper's campaign spokesperson in the 2015 election campaign and just ran Doug Ford's successful provincial campaign. He's also a regular commentator for us here at CTV News. Here's what he said today on the Curse of Politics podcast. Take a listen.
We talk sometimes about campaign malpractice. Blowing a 25-point lead and being like 10 points down is campaign malpractice at the highest level. It's going to be about how we talk to Laura Stone. Like, how many questions did he get on Laura Stone? Like, and look, gross. Like, it was gross. And he is losing women and losing women massively.
All right, Corey is with me live in studio. A few less F-bombs in this conversation. Thanks for making the time. I appreciate it as always.
Well, it is the curse of politics.
Yes, exactly. This was just plain old power play.
Right,
no F-bombs necessary.
We'll keep it clean.
Yeah, exactly. So the headline out of this, and it certainly generated a ton of reaction throughout the day. I can't tell you how many people sent me some of what you said, is certainly the idea that you say this is campaign malpractice at the highest level. Why are you saying that?
Because we blew a 25-point lead. That's why. I know it's uncomfortable for people to hear that said out loud, but like it's in every poll aggregator, the numbers are the numbers. And saying that you don't believe in polls, and if you're managing a campaign, it's delusional. And I don't believe that the Conservatives don't believe in polls. Like I just don't believe that that's true. I think that the polls are the polls. There's a consensus in what those show right now, and you got to take a look at that information as a campaign manager and try to figure out a path to get people who were supporting you a few short months ago back, voting for you when election day comes a couple of short weeks from now. And if you look at who the Conservatives have lost, there are a couple of core constituencies there that typically vote Conservative. The biggest one demographically would be 55-plus voters. So it's a very important cohort. They tend to come out at a higher rate than younger voters. And the Conservatives, when they win elections, they tend to do extremely well with those voters. But they're losing not only 55-plus women, which is a little harder to get, they're massively losing them. They're massively losing them, and largely around the issue of Donald Trump. And they're also losing 55-plus men. Like, this is, very problematic for them. The gender gap is huge right now in this election campaign. And, you've got to wonder what the Conservatives are thinking, having their leader attacking a female reporter in a way that I described as being gross. I think it was really unhelpful to them. That clip has gone viral. It's making its way around the internet, and I think it's turning women off even more from this campaign. So, when I talk about campaign malpractice, blowing a lead that big, and your response being, I don't believe in the polls, I don't know. I think it's kind of weak sauce.
There are some people inside that campaign who would, to play devil's advocate, say, look, this was out of our hands. Like, Trump coming in, the degree to which that, combined with Justin Trudeau, resulted in this complete realignment in public opinion polling. That's stuff that was out of our control. Is that true at all in your view? Or what could they have done to, stop the bleeding, if anything?
It was clear in public opinion polling that Trump was becoming the biggest issue in the land in December, way back in December. And if you look at what we did with the Ford campaign, for instance, that's when we pivoted our campaign. We were running a campaign on affordability and carbon taxes, and a lot of the same things that Poilievre was in 2024. But when you see the public opinion shift that radically on an issue, you have to respond to that. You have to respond. They've reluctantly partially pivoted the campaign, after the first week, I think in response to criticism from myself and other people. But, it's been a very incomplete pivot. And I think it's missing one of the key elements. For a lot of the voters that have moved, they've mostly moved on the Trump issue. And one of the things that is clearly holding them back with Poilievre is all the Trumpy stuff. He's looking and sounding a lot like Trump. So, arguing with a reporter about the size of the crowd at a rally, A campaign slogan that's Canada first. Well, Trump's was America first, right? Like, so I think there's a disconnect there. I think there's some unforced errors that have been made. And look, the good news is there's 2 weeks left. The debates are left. There's a chance for the Conservatives to try to put something together. It's I hate to have to say it, but it's not going well right now.
Well, let me ask you about the next few weeks, because you have worked on a bunch of federal campaigns. You ran Doug Ford's campaign on a number of occasions, including the most recent. Like, what has to happen in the next 2 weeks? Because the gap has been eviscerated, but it's still competitive.
Well, I think they need to, bring some of those voters back who have left them in the last few months, and they need to have the NDP show some life. And I think these things are connected. So, the fact that NDP voters are leaving in droves and Bloc voters are leaving in droves to support Mark Carney, like a central banker, like this is not the kind of guy that you would expect NDP voters to be aligned with. But they're doing it because they're petrified of a Poilievre government. And I think they got to tone down the scary. I think they've got to have a tone that is more accessible to female voters, because I think he's been turning them off. I think some of the rally stuff is very reminiscent of Trump. I think I would tone that down and try to focus on those voters that you need to bring back to your ballot, and you want to focus on also de-risking your candidacy a bit for those NDP voters so that they'll be happy to go home and vote for the NDP. It's very difficult to win on the vote splits that we're seeing right now with the NDP so low.
Do you think it's possible?
I guess anything is possible, Vashi. Like, we've seen campaigns that turn in a couple weeks' time, and the debates next week are a big inflection point potentially. So, I don't think all hope is lost. The election will count, and there is clearly enthusiasm within the Conservative base for his candidacy, so that will bode well, I think, for their voter turnout. But, this campaign is going to be won and lost by those shoulder voters, not by the hardcore activists.
So I was having deja vu, I was telling you earlier, because I remember in 2019, after Andrew Scheer lost, you were very vocal about his leadership and what you thought had to happen to the campaign. That was after the campaign had come to an end, though. And I remember a lot of Conservatives got mad at that time for me putting you on and interviewing you about that. I imagine they're going to have a similar reaction. I should say we reached out to the campaign for a statement because we only found out late in the day that you were able to talk to us. We haven't received it yet. When we do, we will. But what do you say to the party who kind of thinks that you're being disloyal, or whatever they want to call it, to say this in the middle of a campaign?
Well, I'm a commentator. Yes, I'm a Conservative. I vote Conservative. I'll be voting for Poilievre. My job is to give commentary and analysis on the election campaign. I'm not running the campaign. I'm giving commentary and analysis of it. And, not everyone's going to like what I have to say, but it's like the Big Lebowski says, hey, man, it's just your opinion.
Well, thank you for sharing your opinion. As always, you're going to be with me on the set, along with Scott and Kathleen, next week in Montreal for the debates, and of course on Question Period this Sunday. Thanks, Corey.
Great.
I appreciate it. Corey, tonight we're going to talk more about this with our special campaign edition of The Front Bench. Christy Clark, Monty Solberg, and Nathan Cullen are with me next. Stay right there. More Power Play just ahead.
Do you believe the polls, and can you commit today that you will respect the results of the election no matter the outcome?
Yes.
You believe the polls right now, and do you commit to recognizing the result of the election, whatever it is?
Jeez, of course.
Obviously, we would accept the results of the election. But in terms of the polls, we have a very recent example where many polls said that in Ontario, New Democrats would lose party status, and they formed official opposition.
Welcome back to Power Play. To believe the polls or not to, that's one of the questions of the day on the campaign trail after a group of Conservative supporters showed up to an Ontario rally last night donning shirts that read, and signs, I should say, do you believe the polls? Those public opinion polls in the aggregate have certainly shown what was an easy win last year for the Tories has turned into an incredibly competitive race. The Conservative campaign says those signs and shirts are not party or campaign products, but what does it all tell us about the race? Let's bring in our special campaign edition of the front bench. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is with us. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Former federal Conservative cabinet minister and MP Monty Solberg is here. He is the CEO of New West Public Affairs. And former NDP MP and BC Minister Nathan Cullen is with us here in studio. He's now a senior advisor at Strategy Corp. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Nice to see you today.
Hello.
Thanks for making the time. Nathan, you're in studio. I will begin with you. It's nice to have you here. Wish the other two were here as well. The fact that this is sort of part of the race right now, the ability to trust the polls or not, which I understand a healthy skepticism, but you know, last year when the Tories were leading by double digits, there was less skepticism shown. What do you think it says about the state of the race?
The poll is always in the eye of the beholder. It shows what the race has been, which is a dramatic change in just a few months. Major factors, of course, changing, which we've all covered. The presence of Mr. Trump, the absence of Mr. Trudeau, and the race has shuffled out. I would say to where the NDP's perspective is coming that Jagmeet's right to point to the most recent Ontario campaign. Predictions were based on the polls that the NDP would lose all these things, this leader would lose her seat, and the opposite happened. The reason that is because of the relatively focused campaign that they ran, I would say extra focused campaign they had, as well as overperforming. They might lose a region polling-wise, that's what the poll shows you, but they know how to target the seats. And talking to New Democrats across the country in the last few days, lawn sign numbers are way up, marks, and all of those, the data points that a campaign uses at the local level are, for our incumbents and for some target seats, showing really good results. And that's because in a seat, you can have that kind of showing and win the seat, but a poll will capture a dozen seats or an entire province or in some cases an entire country to try to figure out who's winning and who's not.
Just quickly to follow up on that, because provincially they lost their share of the vote. Like it decreased, but they had such great efficiency, as you said, because of the strategy that they employed. I have denoted, and I interviewed Anne McGrath on the show last night, who was pretty clear, like pivot isn't always a bad thing, that they are pivoting to focus on incumbents, to focus sort of at the local level more so than forming government, for example. Is that what they should be doing?
Oh, it should and are doing, and I think that's smart. I think the ability to, you don't pivot when it's all going great. And the questions of going to Mr. Poilievre, and you just had Corey on the show, of his inability to pivot, and in fact double down on things that remind people of Donald Trump and obsessing over crowd sizes. That's weird, and Poilievre has got great discipline. I've always known Pierre to be a very disciplined and focused communicator, but he needed to pivot. As Corey said, the issues of Trump and the reflections of a Trump-style politic in Canada in the way that Mr. Poilievre talks about things, the way that he goes after the media, et cetera, don't need to relitigate that, is why, part of the reason why that they have been losing, well, 25 points in the polls. So the NDP's ability to pivot, focus on what the offer is to Canadians, because we're now starting to get into the offer territory. What's the final ballot question going to be? What's the offer from New Democrats? And being able to hold a government to account as the fear of the Conservative forming government diminishes, which I think is happening. We're starting to see that soft Liberal vote, and will it start to move over in key ridings over to the NDP? And I think that's a pretty smart strategy.
Okay, Monty, I want to give you the chance to respond to part of what we did hear from Corey and what was on that podcast. Essentially, what Nathan laid out. We don't need to relitigate it. I'm sure you're familiar with his line of reasoning. Do you think he's right? Like, is essentially, was the reading of the room not done in time and not done to the full degree that it should have been?
Well, campaigns adjust all the time. Pierre's has been adjusting right from the very beginning, and as has every campaign. I don't think it's particularly helpful to go public and sort of do the autopsy on the body while we're still in the middle of the campaign. The NDP and the Liberals love it when we do that. And it knocks the leader and his team, off their message for a couple of days when we do that. So I just think we need to be a bit restrained and offer our advice privately and let, the campaign decide what they're going to do based on what they're seeing. And there's a big difference between wish casting and forecasting on these things. I hear what Nathan's saying about, how you're going to come up and pick up support because you've got lawn signs and this kind of thing out. The truth is, we're in the middle of a campaign. It's tight. The Conservatives have a great chance to get ahead, but we can't worry too much about precisely where the polls are at. What we need to do is be disciplined and consistent, stick to our message, and adjust as needed as we go.
All right, Christy, what do you think?
Well, I have a lot of time for both of these very smart people we're on here with Monty and Nathan, and obviously Corey tonight as well. But I tell you, I don't think the problem is that the Conservatives shouldn't believe the polls. I think it's they're refusing to accept what the polling is telling them. And what the polling is telling them is that there are some fundamental weaknesses around Pierre Poilievre himself, the character of the man. And that's always been kind of the dark part of the campaign that they've got going. So yes, it's true. They failed to pivot to kind of being more current and speaking to the issues with the United States and tariffs. But when you think about women over 55, and I'm in that category, a lot of my friends are in that category, there've been, you don't meet many who have ever really been very comfortable with Pierre Poilievre. There's something about his kind of level of aggression, his refusal to adapt, his sense of self-confidence that I think leaves people feeling a little bit uncomfortable, because what we want are leaders who are stable and focused, but able to change their minds, able to listen to others, especially in chaotic times like this. And so, I mean, I've been a Liberal all my life. I thought the Conservatives were guaranteed to win this election. I thought, boy, even at the beginning, Kim Campbell, John Turner, both popped up in the polls and both of them lost. Mark Carney has turned out to be a totally different animal than most people ever gave him credit for, and Pierre Poilievre has turned out to be a lot more vulnerable than any of us ever gave him credit for.
I can see both your colleagues want to jump in. I have to take a quick commercial break. We'll keep this exact conversation going on the other end of that break. I promise we're back in just a moment. Welcome back to Power Play and a special campaign edition of The Front Bench with Christy Clark, Monty Solberg, and Nathan Cullen. We're talking about the state of the race. Monty, I wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to what Christy just laid out. Sort of the Poilievre factor, one way or the other. It really obviously worked for the Conservatives when I think his tone, his tenor, the substance of what he was saying was really matching the disappointment many Canadians felt and the frustrations that they had, and was certainly up against Trudeau at the time. Now he has a different opponent in Mark Carney, largely who has not been scrutinized, beyond the past 2 months. What would you say about his ability to kind of match up against him and the, as I put it, the Poilievre factor? How do you interpret it?
Well, I think people need to get to know Pierre. I mean, he's got an amazing, really Canadian story, origin story about, growing up the son of a single mom and being adopted, and, just some of the struggles that his family went through. And, they need to get to know him. And I think that's something that really should be on display a bit more in the campaign. But, Mark Carney really hasn't been tested. And to the degree he is being tested, we're seeing cracks. And a good example is how he handled questions today about the candidate Markham, who has these associations to an organization associated with the Communist Party, and whether or not Mark Carney himself is associated with this organization. And he just gets very testy when he comes under that kind of pressure. Then there's the questions about the Brookfield funds and the tax havens in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. And again, he gets very testy when he's asked about these things. So, I do think there needs to be a lot more scrutiny of Mr. Carney. He brings some things to the table that are impressive for sure. But is he really as down to earth as people portray him? I think he needs to answer some of these questions before we can really make those judgments.
It feels like, Nathan, Mr. Carney is able to benefit from two things. First, like this just coming onto the scene thing, which does allow among the public like a certain honeymoon period. Because I, too, listened to the answer to that question today where he basically accused the Globe and Mail of being fake news, in not so many words, which if a conservative, I think, had said, would have been, characterized as an affront to democracy. But it's sort of like a little bit of a pass, I think, in a way. And maybe there are certain attributes he possesses that allows for that as well. But he's also prime minister. And that, I think, has, created a very hard situation for both, all of the opposition leaders, I should say, even the Bloc's leader, too.
Sure. Ford used this to his advantage in Ontario, right? I am both premier and I'm a candidate, and I'll switch back and forth depending on the day. And I don't want to be too light about it. It's also serious. He is prime minister. We're in the middle of an existential crisis and trade war with the Americans. He's got to come to Ottawa once in a while and say things and do things. That's fine. I would, to Monty's point, I've known Mark a bit over the years. I like him. He's a very personable guy. He has been more testy than I thought he would be on these just little thin skin. And perhaps as a central banker and a prominent business person, he's not had to face this kind of scrutiny where somebody challenges him on something, which the Globe and Mail did, reputable newspaper, saying, hey, is there some sort of challenge, not only with your candidate, but maybe also you? You got to be ready for that in politics. And this is the point. This interview process that we do in Canada over these 35 days is the ability to answer those questions in a verifiable way. Of course, Mr. Carney is benefiting by not being Mr. Trudeau. Out where I live in the West, that is number one for a lot of voters who were just done. And no offense to Justin, but they were done. Mark gets that benefit. But being able to handle those questions and face that test, I think the shine's coming off a bit. Is another, whatever we've got, 18 days enough to change that? Will the race tighten up? It may well. And I think that's going to be for a really interesting election night and a really important one. Beside all of this, the personalities and everything else, our country really does need strong leadership in Ottawa. And I would argue a good check on power, because the questions the next government are going to face are not easy. They're going to need to be balanced with not just one ideological worldview, perhaps a mix of worldviews. Not a bad way to go about dealing with something that we've never dealt with before, which is such a hostile government in the U.S.
Well, I wanted to actually turn to that just briefly, if I could, and get each of you to weigh in on where things stand. Christy, this wild 24 hours that we've just witnessed with Donald Trump, after all of his delegates said he would never press pause on these so-called reciprocal tariffs, he did exactly that. He's now saying he's open to an even longer pause, and he's really indicating, and so is, for example, Howard Lutnick and Scott Bessent, that it's all about countries not retaliating if they want to engage in negotiations. What are your thoughts on the possibility of a change in Canada's posture as far as that goes?
Well, it's very hard to make an accurate prediction about what we should do at this point, because Trump is so completely unpredictable himself. So I know that the negotiators and that the Carney team are close ears to the ground on all of these kind of changes that are going through the system. But I think it's really important for candidates to stand strong in the face of it, to appear to be strong and to not to appear to be wobbling. The thing that's really so interesting about this right now is that you've got all of these people vying to be prime minister, and the things that they need to do, that Mark Carney needs to do, and Pierre Poilievre as well, and Jagmeet Singh, to stabilize the country kind of as a practical effort outside of politics, may not be the same things that would serve them well in a national election period. So I think Carney was right to say to agree with Trump, hey, look, let's set as much of this aside as we can until after the election is concluded. I think that's really important. And I think that's because I think what Canadians want is we really truly want stability. But I was going to say this, just because, to answer to Nathan, my experience in politics was when people are like normal people and they haven't been in politics for a long time, when the media asks them questions that they think are dumb, they respond like normal people do. And I kind of think that's what you're seeing Mark Carney do. And maybe that's not the worst thing in the world, to have somebody who isn't a professional politician all his life actually want to take on the job of prime minister.
My view is you can be a professional, not a professional politician, and not dismiss questions of accountability.
I think that's my biased view. It's a good point on tone, right? And if somebody asks you, the Globe and Mail is asking a credible question. We can argue whether their source material is good enough, but the question about foreign interference in our elections is real, and it's important and matters to a bunch of Canadians. So the reaction of saying, I think essentially Mark does this. He says, in tone, he says that's a stupid question. And unless it is an actual stupid question, it doesn't look good, I would argue. Professional politicians are just human to be so dismissive and to sort of pretend away the fear that is being asked in what was a legitimate question. To the Trump thing, it's kind of like negotiating with a toddler in a way, and I don't mean to be rude to the President of the United States.
Negotiations at home right now.
So as
Trust
you
me,
know,
it's rough.
or you're your drunk friend at the bar, and you're trying to negotiate them away from getting in the car, and you got to find any tactic that will work to convince said toddler or inebriated person that this is not in your best interest. And I think that Christie talks about all the leaders striking a tone in this election, which is tough because you're middle of campaign, you're trying to distinguish, but a tone that says to the Canadian people and to the Americans, we're going to be adults, we're going to be steady.
I think they all have.
And I think that's been kind of remarkable, and maybe a little like, hey, look at us, Canadians.
But particularly in a campaign, as you point out, when there's no advantage to doing that politically.
That's exactly right. So then the distinctions become on the other things, right? How are you going to govern? What are you going to do? How are you going to help workers who lose their jobs because of this? How are we going to build up the Canadian economy, diversify trade? Those are all good things. But Trump, I think it's amazing to me that the leaders have not made huge distinctions because there would be naturally in a campaign lots of motivation to try to put a lot of light between you and your adversaries, and that hasn't happened.
Monty wanted to jump in as well. Go ahead, Monty.
Well, I did. I just wanted to say that Mark Carney needs to be careful because if he gets short with reporters over some of these very basic questions, he starts to look arrogant, and that's exactly the thing that will bring him down. It's the thing that brought down Justin Trudeau, and it's pretty early in his tenure to be at that point. So just some advice from somebody who's been around for a little while. But just getting back to the trade issue, there's no question. I agree with Christie that Donald Trump will change his position 20 times in a week. So we need to constantly consult with unions, with premiers, et cetera, before we craft positions, and we really have to wait almost until the moment we're confronted with having to make decisions ourselves. I mean, this is just the reality of living with Donald Trump as president, and if we can do that somewhat successfully, maybe we can navigate our way through this. But it's also true, I just have to add that, Mark Carney has a tremendous advantage in this campaign because he is prime minister, has the full weight of the bully pulpit every time he gets up to the mic, and the full weight of the prime minister's office to make these announcements. And it's pretty hard to compete against that if you're a leader of the opposition.
Okay, I have to leave our discussion there. Thanks, everybody. I think I have 30 seconds, Christy, if you want to jump in. I see you want to.
Well, just to say that Kim Campbell and John Turner were both prime ministers of the country, and they both got absolutely slaughtered in the election. So I'm not sure it necessarily is an advantage, but I would say that Mark Carney is certainly bringing some assets to the table that they didn't.
This moment.
Maybe in this context, but fair point, yeah. Okay, I'll leave it there. Look forward to talking to you guys all next week. Thanks so much, Monty Silver, Christy Clark, and Nathan Cullen. After a short break, Nick Nanos is here with the latest on the state of the race. Back in a moment. Welcome back to Power Play. As we head into the final few weeks of the Snap election campaign, we of course want to get a sense of where things stand with all the big political parties and how efficient their vote is. No one better to help us do that than our pollster of record here at CTV, Nick Nanos. He's also the founder and chief data scientist for Nanos Research. Nick, good to see you. Happy Thursday. Let's look at the top line. You're tracking this every night. Where do things stand right now?
As of last night, the CTV News Global Mail tracking has the Liberals at 43%, the Conservatives at 38%, NDP at 9%. So the gap of 5%. Thing is last week the Liberals had a gap or advantage of 11%. So Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are narrowing. And you know what? It's a horse race, Vashi.
Are you still seeing, just quickly before we get into the seats, the fluctuations based on Trump event? So you were saying last week that, when Mark Carney responds in his capacity as prime minister, you see a bump for the Liberals, and then it recedes as the issue or the sort of target on Canada's back appears to recede even momentarily.
Two things. Yes, we do see the Trump effect in terms of that benefiting the Liberals. And, when the campaign is focused on meat and potatoes issues like the cost of living, taxes, all that kind of stuff, it evens the playing field between Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney. The other kicker in the last 4 or 5 days, the Conservatives being much more competitive among middle-aged voters. This is a critical demographic. They care about meat and potatoes issues. They vote, and they're highly motivated. So that's good news for Pierre Poilievre.
What do you attribute that to? Is it the so-called pivot to talking more about Trump, or is it something else?
I think it actually is attributed to the focus on the economy and jobs and also dealing with Trump. What I'll say is the 1-2 punch. I think the reality is at the beginning of the campaign, Pierre Poilievre was a one-punch wonder. Now he's a two-punch wonder. Why don't we just say that?
All right, let's talk about seats. And as of Sunday, your seat projections nationally, where are you kind of focused in? What should we know about this picture?
Well, one of the critical things to remember is there's still over 50 seats that are too close to call. They're up for grabs. But you can see that the distribution of support is favoring the Liberals right now. Even though they're only 4 or 5 points ahead of the Conservatives, they're converting more into seats because in the prairie provinces where the Conservative bedrock is, they're winning that region by like 20 percentage points compared to the other regions where the Liberals are only ahead by 5 to 10.
Let's go a little bit deeper into the regions, and we'll start with Ontario. In particular, both of the campaigns, the Conservatives and the Liberals there over the past 24 hours or so. Why is this such a competitive and important area electorally?
Well, the Liberals have picked up steam in the province of Ontario. More importantly, their heartland, city of Toronto, has come back after kind of abandoning them. Remember the St. Paul's by-election? That was a significant setback, probably was part of the beginning of the end for Justin Trudeau. But, check out the city of Toronto. Basically, all the seats at this point in time leaning towards the Liberals. Also, the Liberals doing well in the Mississauga, Bramptons, Oakville, Etobicoke all the way down. But the Liberals, the Conservatives, that is, still doing well in the greater burbs and north of Toronto.
Is this a demographic thing? Is this an issue set thing? Cost of living versus Trump, age groups, what is it?
I think a lot of this has to do with traditionally strong Conservative areas that are in kind of smaller town, more rural setting, a little more affluent, and the Conservatives still doing well in there. But, the thing is, at one point, the Liberals looked like they were completely falling apart when they were only at 20% nationally. But now, they're back in the driver's seat, at least in Toronto.
The times they be a-changing. Let's move over to Quebec because we've got that important set of two debates. The first one will be French. The second one will be in English. What's happening in Quebec right now?
Well, in Quebec, the dynamic is also with the Bloc Québécois. When we see that the Liberal numbers go down in the province of Quebec, that's usually good and has been good for the Bloc. And when we zoom into Montreal, the Liberals have been able to kind of regain support in the island of Montreal. You can see the NDP this week still have that one seat. Last week, it was too close to call, if you remember. But, once we get to the South Shore and the North Shore, you can see the Bloc Québécois being stronger and the Liberals actually challenging the Bloc in a lot of these ridings.
And when we move far, far, far west over to BC, they had spent quite a bit of time over the past week. They're all three campaigns at one point. What's happening here?
Well, if you look at the interior of BC and the coast, true blue all the way through. But when you zoom into the lower mainland, this is really probably explains why both Carney and Poilievre just came off a swing into British Columbia. Look at that. Look at the NDP are usually good in British Columbia. I think half of their caucus is from BC. But look at it right now. They only have one seat declared. Jagmeet Singh, we still have in the red category right now. So he's in a fight for his life. And, the Liberals and the Conservatives, why don't we just say it, circling around like vultures. You're laughing. In British Columbia. I know it's harsh.
Imagery, all right?
It's harsh, but they're there because they see that the NDP are back on their heels in one of the most important provinces for the New Democrats, and both the Conservatives and the Liberals are looking to pick up seats.
I want to ask you more about that because you've got them at what nationally?
9.
The NDP at 9%. You can denote a real or demarcate a real shift in the answers Jagmeet Singh is giving to the question of whether he can be prime minister or not. And the focus, it seems, from the campaign, including their spokesperson on our show last night, a pivot, she said, not always a bad thing, pivot toward talking about incumbency, retaining the seats they have versus, being able to make massive gains or even puncture through into government in some way. Does that make sense when you see the numbers?
Oh, absolutely. At 9%, we were talking about this before, they haven't had something this bad in terms of percentage support since 2000. Here's another little tidbit. Last time the NDP were not able to be an official party in the House of Commons, 1993, over 30 years ago. Right now in the seat projections, you can see we have them a lock for 3. Maybe they'll pick up some more. But, focusing on incumbent ridings. And this was a lot like the Ontario election. The New Democrats in Ontario lost popular support.
Had an efficient vote, yeah.
It actually almost dropped in half. I think it dropped from like 25, 26 to 16, 17%. And they were able to hold on to their seats. So I think they're taking a page out of the New Democrats in Ontario. It's a really good strategy. Not sure if it'll work.
Last question, and it's kind of on the question of the day, or one of the main questions of the day on the campaign trail. So there's these Conservative supporters who have shown up to the rallies, kind of questioning whether or not to believe the polls, given how big a presence these supporters have at the rallies. So we're talking thousands of people, not something that we're used to seeing in Canada. How do you reconcile that with what we're seeing here? When I ask Conservatives behind the scenes on the campaign, their central point is essentially when you look at the way the polls are modeled and the dependence on or the factoring in of previous election results, it's their sense that the Poilievre base is different than the Scheer and the O'Toole base, that it's wider in scope. It's not the quote-unquote Conservatives that you're used to seeing show up, and that they don't know how much that's missing out of the polling modeling, but they do feel it's a factor. How would you respond to that?
Well, the Conservative spinners, I'll call them that, because they're not experts in this kind of stuff. Polling is not based on previous historical results. Ours are not. It's pure random sampling. However, it makes sense how they feel. You know why, Vashi? Because at 38%, that's better than any Conservative candidate has done in recent memory since Stephen Harper.
Base.
Yeah, so they do have a bigger base. The rally should feel bigger. But the thing is that in this bizarro election that we're living in, 38% is not enough to win an election. So, you know, for Pierre Poilievre, his number's great, but he needs more than 38 in order to defeat the Liberals when people are consolidating around the two frontrunners.
Okay, great explanation. Nick, thank you so much. Nick Nanos is our pollster of record here at CTV, also the chief data scientist and founder of Nanos Research. We've got lots more Power Play just ahead. Welcome back to Power Play. Some news out of the United States today, as seems to be the case almost every day, but it was 24 hours ago we learned that it would be status quo for Canada when it comes to the application of tariffs, while much of the rest of the world would see a reprieve of about 90 days on the so-called reciprocal tariffs that Trump had put in place. That's save and except for China, of course. Now today, Trump is signaling that he's open to a pause longer than 90 days in insisting that this was all about negotiation.
We're trying to get the world to treat us fairly. This is something that should have been done 25 years ago, and it wasn't. Should have been done 40 years ago, and it wasn't. But no president was willing to take it on, but you had to. It's not sustainable. We have Scott here and Howard and some of the people that are working on deals, and the biggest problem they have is they don't have enough time in the day. Everybody wants to come and make a deal. And we're working with a lot of different countries, and it's all going to work out very well. I think it's going to work out really very well, but we're in good shape.
All right, as you heard there from Donald Trump claiming to be open to negotiations. So the question, of course, that follows is where do things stand with Canada? Right now, as I mentioned, it's status quo, so still a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, 10% on potash, 25% on foreign-made cars. Our retaliatory tariffs are also in place, but lots of questions for the Prime Minister and his delegates, of course, over the course of today, I should say, about whether or not that will change. There's a cabinet committee on this very issue that happens tomorrow out of Ottawa. I'll leave Power Play there. Thanks for watching.